Looks like I'm doing a sequel right after a sequel with Rayman 2: The Great Escape, also known as... hold on a second. Rayman 2 Revolution, Rayman DS, Rayman 3D, Rayman 2 Forever, or just simply Rayman 2. Wow, this game has just as many titles as a 1970s exploitation film.
I've only played Rayman, Rayman Origins, and Legends Jungle Run, and the first Raving Rabbids if you count that as a Rayman game. So I've only played the 2D games and a third-party one if you count that. Personally, I don't count Raving Rabbids, so I would say that I only touched the 2D games, so this would be my first 3D Rayman game. Now, the version that I'm playing is the PS2 remake that was re-released on the PlayStation Network, but I will bring up the other versions from time to time. But I haven't played those, so I really can't draw any comparisons. I can only assume what I read about the other versions and seen from screenshots and videos that they're accurate. I'm not surprised that there's so many versions of this game. After all, the first Rayman had multiple versions, and now thanks to the PlayStation Network, I now own all the main Rayman games. Like Mario, Rayman is a series that I don't go out of my way to acquire, but will buy it when I have the itch for it. In fact, there's very few games out there that I go out of my way to purchase. In fact, the last game I did go out of my way to buy was the day I uploaded the Spyro 2 review. I picked up Watch Dogs, and I plan on reviewing that game soon because I think it represents many problems in the gaming industry as a whole, making it a perfect example.
And I like Ubisoft. I've never had a problem with them, but with this game being an example of problems wrong with the gaming industry with all the controversy surrounding it, that's scary.
The only development history that I could find on Rayman 2 was that it was originally going to be a 2D side-scroller like its predecessor meant for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, but that idea was scrapped and they made it into a 3D game. And like I said in my Spyro 2 video, it follows the logic of the first game made a lot of money, let's make another. Surprisingly, Rayman 2 doesn't have the amount of ports, versions, and re-releases that the first had, having 9 versus 12. I gotta hand it to Ubisoft for wanting to get their games onto as many platforms as they could, and they still try to keep up with it by releasing games on all systems out now and on the PC, except for the Wii U where they'd rather sit on ready-to-sell games rather than release it for the poor excuse of a low install base. The version that I'm playing is the PS2 Rayman Revolution. From what I've read and seen in screenshots and videos, it's somewhat of a port of the Dreamcast version, at least graphically. I'm not 100% sure. There are some changes from the Great Escape and Revolution, such as changes in some of the level design and some aesthetic things, like Return to Ares removes the music only to replace it with ambience. Also, this version has an abysmal frame rate. The Dreamcast version runs at 60 frames a second. The PS2 version, which is running on more powerful hardware than the Dreamcast, can barely keep it at what I'm guessing is 24 frames a second. And there are times when it drops to disgusting, but not unplayable levels.
Again, from what I've read, the Dreamcast version appears to be the superior one. Unfortunately, I don't have the equipment needed to record Dreamcast games, but when I eventually do, this is a game that I'll probably go back to check out its multiple versions to see which one's better.
For the PS2, the graphics are on par with the system that it was on for the time it was released, but you can tell that there's a game under it with a lower polygon count and lower resolution textures, as some things look like they were meant for a less powerful system than the PS2. The animation is done pretty well, although the lip syncing is way off, and I think it has to do with voice acting being thrown in, as originally the characters only spoke gibberish. And speaking of sound, the music is good, but holy crap is the sound mixing terrible, as background music will completely drown out the voices and sound effects. I had to lower the volume of the music to near mute and raise the voices all the way to max just so I could judge the quality of the acting. Which to say, I don't like Rayman's voice. Billy West does a better job in the Rayman animated series, because I think West's nasally voice fits the character better. Rayman in this game sounds like Roger Craig Smith's Sonic, only 20 years older with a little to no personality. Globix and the Teensy sound exactly how I pictured them, and the other character voices fit them. Murphy sounds like Double D from Ed, Edd and Eddy, but from what I could find, he's not. And Murphy's smile in this game is extremely creepy.
And people said that the Burger King mascot was creepy. Murphy, on the other hand, he looks like something that would bite your head off in a nightmare.
The controls are pretty good for Rayman's first 3D game. You move with the analog stick, you throw your fist with square or circle, although he really just throws a ball of energy, which I find a little off-putting as Rayman is known for throwing his fist. It's kind of his trademark. He can still spin his hair like a helicopter and grab power-ups to make his fist stronger. You can control the camera with L1 and R1, but it only rotates it. To look around, you need to hold them both down and move the analog stick. L2 will allow Rayman to strafe back and forth, and it gives him something of a lock-on that only works when it wants to. You can pick up objects and throw them, but it can be finicky at times, as it may look like Rayman is in the proper position to throw at your target, but really he's not, and you'll miss completely. Throwing things is something I found that you really only needed for puzzle solving or exploring. I haven't thrown anything at an enemy, as carrying things really limits your mobility. Rayman can swing from pink lums in a pretty fun way, and swinging from lum to lum feels satisfying as opposed to platforming in the traditional way. Along the way, you'll get Globix who can summon rain when there's something blocking your path. There's a lot of quite interesting mechanics to help you along your way as you play the game.
The only thing that doesn't help is this game's horrendous checkpoint system. It's Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness bad.
You'll find green lums about the levels. Murphy tells you that they're checkpoints, but they're not. If you fall into water you can't swim in or off a cliff, you'll reappear at that point with a little bit of your health missing. But if you die, it's back to the last time you saved the game. If you saved. There's no autosave, and every time you transition to a new area or even after a cutscene, the game asks if you want to save. Why isn't there an autosave? Sonic Adventure had an autosave, and that was 2 years before this version of the game was released. You see the save screen just as much as you see the loading screens from Sonic 06. This is the only annoying aspect of the game, this piss-poor checkpoint system, especially in sections that are too long with no green lums. Like the water skiing section in the swamp. If you're almost at the end of one of the sections and the rope gets cut, it's back to the beginning. Other sections include riding a rocket through an obstacle course, which can be longer than the water skiing sections, and I don't mind these sections that much because they can be fun, but I wish that the control for them wasn't so loose, cause in very small tunnels it's like a game of pinball.
But those sections aren't around for long, and once you finally get past them, there's a lot more platforming fun to be had.
As for game length, it's about 8 hours, and for difficulty, it's pretty easy. The only difficulty I had was with the camera, as the right analog stick wasn't programmed for moving it, making it a very literal port of a game that only has one analog stick. And there's times where you'll be in an enclosed area and the camera will freak out if you try to run back or around corners. It doesn't happen all the time, but if and when it does, it can be annoying. I will say that after playing Spyro 2, where it hit its collectathon nature from what was a superb platforming experience, I'm glad Rayman 2 doesn't go that route. They say you need to collect 1,000 lums, but not collecting them doesn't stop you from progressing. Your main mission is to stop the robot pirate named Razorbeard, but you need help by collecting the 4 masks to wake up Polycus. And to do this, you have to free the Teensy Kings, because they tell you where you need to go to help others, as you need their help to get the masks to defeat Razorbeard, and that objective just went full circle. And that's pretty much the story as well. It's a stop the bad guy story that's pretty straightforward. There's really no character development or twists and turns, it's just a basic fantasy story, which is fine because platform games don't need anything complex.
As some 3D Sonic games have proven, when you try to stretch out a simplistic premise with simplistic characters by making it more complex, the story just falls apart very easily and then it gets really stupid.
This version of Rayman 2 hasn't aged that well, as really the only thing that bugged me was the terrible frame rate, which I feel is unacceptable. I was able to deal with the camera, and I tolerated the not-so-stellar checkpoint system, and while the combat needed some fine-tuning, I was able to manage. But the platforming and exploration was done really well, and I found the overall adventure to be fun and enjoyable. I find it interesting that Rayman 3 got an HD remake, yet Rayman 2 hasn't. And Rayman 2 is the highest rated game in the series with an average score of 9.2 out of 10, while Rayman 3 is the lowest rated with an average score of 7.5 out of 10. If you like platform games, you should definitely get it, but I recommend getting the Dreamcast version as, like I said earlier in the review, I've heard that it's the superior version. I do want to try and do a video on the N64, PS1, and Dreamcast version, and if anyone wants to see that, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you do, don't count on it happening anytime soon. I want to say that the PS2 version is good for its time, but since I can't compare it to any of its counterparts, I really can't say anything.
I really don't know how to rate this one, but let's go with decent for the lowest and full price at the highest. And when the time comes and I check out some of the other versions of this game, I'll solidify this one's at that time.